Welcome to Bridge to Practice, Live with the Author. This is Reading Research Quarterly's new podcast and Skype interview series. Today, though, we have a local author with us, Dr. Debbie Rowe. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you.
Now, Debbie has written one of our wonderful Reading Research Quarterly papers, and she's going to tell us all about it and help us make some of those bridges to practice. So, Debbie, what's the title of your paper?
I titled it Pointing with a Pen, the use of gesture in early childhood writing.
Oh, fascinating. And what were some of the big ideas, or, can you tell us a little bit about that paper?
Well, I think an interesting thing here is that the paper got started from something I didn't understand about young children's writing. And basically, when I started watching these 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds writing, they all produced a pattern on the page that was unexpected, which I tried to ignore for a while, but eventually I looped back to try to analyze that. And basically, the pattern looks like kids are drawing circles on the page around the center object on the page. In this case, it was a photograph.
Huh, really?
Right. It was surprising. It's not what I expected kids to do. And so I always assume that kids are not random. And I thought, why in the world are kids doing that? So I launched into an analysis to try to understand that. And basically, the big idea in terms of what's being analyzed is that this is really gestural inscription, where kids are basically pointing to the page in terms of what they're interested in with the pen. And that's for these youngest children is really, really common. It gets a little less common with children who are in 4 and 5 years of age. So,
very cool. So based off of the findings of your paper, what would you tell teachers?
I think what we've understood is that the earliest stages of writing, like all other language learning, are social processes, and it makes a difference that we're talking with kids around the page, that you have a chance for the page to be in front of you, to point to the page, to talk with kids about what they're doing. And that's really where kids learn a lot of foundational things about how the print system works.
So that's so interesting. So it's not just my kid goes and writes.
Right.
It's much more that the children are writing and I'm around them, and the children are telling me about their work and I'm pointing, they're pointing, right? So it's the interaction.
Right, that's exactly. I mean,
the teacher and the child.
That's really where it starts. I mean, kids don't really, at the very beginning, understand that marks carry meaning. I mean, that's something that children have to learn when they're very young. And so we sort of take that for granted as we get with older children. Right. But the way they learn that is by putting marks on the page, and someone begins to talk with them about that and says, oh, tell me about that, or read that to me if they think it's a writing event. And those interactions are really crucial.
And when you talk about gesture, is it the talk that's crucial? Is it the pointing? So it's giving the mark itself meaning?
Right.
Or what do we, as a teacher, how do I guide that conversation or those gestures?
It turns out that adults do this pretty naturally if they are sitting down around the page with kids. So adults and children pretty naturally start pointing to the page when they're talking to it, and adults tap the page and point to the part that they're interested in. And that really brings attention to these marks that kids may have made. Kids, when you say to a child, oh, why don't you write that down, or draw that for me, write that for me, they may at first not really have a sense at all of what you really intend for them to do. But if there's something on the page, the sort of natural reaction is to point to that, to say that's what's important on the page. And that's where kids started sort of circling the photograph that was on the page to say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And then that gives a platform for the adult to respond to the mark and to draw attention to the mark and say, oh, that's interesting, tell me about that. And of course, at first, kids don't really exactly know what's going on. It's these continued interactions around this, and they get lots of cues from what adults say, but also from what adults do when they point.
So cool. So it seems like there's two pieces. It's the interaction.
Yeah.
But then I also heard you say continued interaction.
Right.
So it's not like we expect this to happen the first time.
No, and it's a long process. So yeah, it's just the very beginnings. I really see this as the very beginnings of writing. Vygotsky really said that, writing is the acorn to the oak of, that gesture is the acorn to the oak of writing, sort of. I mean, really? In so many words. And it's sort of the very, very beginnings of writing begin with gesture, and gesture is something that's produced for another person, right? It's got an addressee. Right. I want you to notice what I'm gesturing toward. So when children begin to gesture toward the page and they have a pen in their hand, they often leave marks there. And then adults see those marks and start to talk about them. And that's sort of where this idea that, oh, the marks on the page are really significant starts.
Very cool. Well, it almost seems like a different way for them to convey meaning, right? Like, so they can talk,
right?
They can make marks, but they can also use gesture to convey meaning.
Right, exactly. It's all part of the same. And I think initially, kids have, we know that in early language learning, kids have they have more experience with gesture. That's really where language starts. Gesture is very important in the very early stages of oral language development. So they've already got a lot of gestural capability. They're starting to have language capability when you're 2 and 2.5. And so they're putting all those together. And so when they have the pen in the hand, they start gesturing toward the page and leave a mark. We're starting to pull them in, use those same capabilities to pull themselves into writing.
And what would you, if you went into a preschool classroom, what would you love to see?
I have a stock set of things I want to see. First of all, I want to see adults sitting down with kids around the page so that everybody can look at, so we have a shared target of attention around the page so we can all touch it, point to it, so that's important. I want to see adults inviting kids to write. So even though we know children are at the very beginning stages of writing, we want them to, use emergent writing to record their message. So I always say invite kids to write, accept whatever kids do and talk with them about it, respond to the meaning, and then invite kids to read what they wrote to you.
Very cool. All right, I love it. Is there anything that you walk in and you cringe on that we should avoid?
There are lots of things. I think all the experiences that kids have around writing can be useful in some way. But I think we oftentimes could get into the spot where we're always correcting children and saying, no, that's not right. I think really for these youngest kids, just like with oral language, when a child says, cook, and they mean cookie, and they're pointing to the cookie jar, we don't
celebrate.
Say, exactly. We say, oh, you want a cookie. We respond to the meaning of that. We don't say, oh, you can't get a cookie until you can pronounce the word cookie. And I think we don't always do that with writing. Instead, we say, oh, no, you didn't get that letter formed exactly right, or we even assume that they can't write. So I think responding to the meaning of what children do at this early stages, of course we want them to move toward convention, and they will move toward convention as we start to teach them how to learn to write their name, they start to pay attention to letters, but we really need them to have opportunities with the pen in their hand. Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's the idea that kids can convey their meaning, their ideas, likely before they can convey all those conventions or the actual letters or spelling of words.
For sure.
So what would you tell principals or policymakers?
I would tell principals that if they are walking and taking a tour of their preschool, pre-K, very early grades room like kindergarten classrooms, that they should see children being invited to write. They should see teachers talking with them about that writing, but they shouldn't expect the products to look correct all the time. So actually participating as a writer is super important. So
kids need to write in a large way.
Invite them to read, get kids engaged.
I love it. So what would you tell parents?
Well, I think we need parents to know the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. I think we need parents to say, invite your child to write, respond to the meaning of what they say, certainly help your child learn to write their name. And of course, that's important, but invite them to write other messages. It's much more common for adults to invite children to write the well-practiced message of a child's name, which is important, but it's much less common for adults to invite kids to write anything else. So it's a card to your grandmother, and it's a birthday, and so they say, oh, come sign your name here. Great. But say, what do you want to write a message to grandmother? What do you want to say? Ask the child to write it down. Oh, do you use kid writing? Do your very best at that. And then ask kids to read it to you.
I love it.
And then if you need to, stick a Post-it onto grandmother on the back side when you send the card, so grandmother knows what the child said, so they can respond to that.
Or these days, we've talked about this a few times, and so I have a 2-year-old, and so she was writing Valentines, and I actually recorded her writing the Valentines, and she was scribbling away, and everything had a lot of messages,
Right.
Dear Zachary, I hope you have a great Valentine's Day. And we recorded it because the time before that I tried to write on it,
right.
She told me, Mommy, I already wrote that.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to discourage kids so that they think it's only adult writing. So yes, recording is wonderful. And of course, a lot of the new digital apps have an opportunity for kids to press a button and actually record their voice reading it, which is cool.
Very cool. Well, it's a great way to integrate technology as well in a meaningful way.
absolutely.
So, Debbie, where do we go next in the field based off of your work?
I think we need to get the word out that emergent writing is a foundational piece of what children do. And I think we really need to help spread the word about how sort of what we expect writing development to look like over time, because that helps teachers and parents think, oh yeah, this is really going well. I can see the difference in what my child is doing, even though the product still isn't conventional. I mean, I think that's essential. I think we need to continue to develop measures and ways for tracing this for teachers, and I've been working on that some myself, and others have as well. We know a lot about how early writing works. We know how foundational it is. We know how connected it is to reading. Essentially, if we're just doing great reading instruction, that's fabulous, but we're missing half of the process. And they, especially in the early years, a lot of kids sort of write their way into reading to understand how the print process works. So it's like they're like two sides of the same coin, and if we only teach reading but we don't use the children's opportunities to try to figure out how this works through writing, we're missing a lot of opportunities. So
I think we need to do their voice, their ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they've got so much to share.
Right.
We want to hear that.
And we want to invite that.
I love it. There was one other piece that I thought you emphasized, and I just wanted to reemphasize, was it seems like we do know a lot about children's development of writing, what it looks like, that it does look a little bit more unconventional at the beginning.
Right.
But one piece that you mentioned is that it also looks interactive.
Right.
And so writing is not just a child independently writing at the table.
Right.
Right. Writing is talking about that piece.
And so teachers have got to, especially in the early years, teachers have got to organize their time. I'm thinking especially about teachers that may have a center-based kind of program. Some of that time needs to be spent sitting down with children, wherever they are, in the block center, in the science center, whatever part of the room they are. But you really do have to sit down with children for a while, talk with them. There's a lot of time spent in talk. I guess that's the other thing. I'm doing some other current analyses which are really, sort of emphasizing that. If you look at a writing event of a really expert writing teacher, only a part of it is pen, for either of them, is pen on the page. There's quite a lot of opportunity for talk, and you've got to develop that sort of shared understanding of what the meaning is going to be together before kids have anything to write or before they understand why you would write something. So I think it's, sit down, talk with kids about interesting objects, interesting ideas, things you're teaching in school. Think about how would writing naturally be part of that event. Invite kids to be part of that. You write with them, share the writing, but you do need to be doing it together. I think that's a great idea.
And I love your other piece, which is natural, right? So there are so many things that happen across a kid's day that are naturally, we can write about, right? A science experiment, a story, something happens cool on the playground.
Right.
They can write a letter to a friend. They can write a menu. They can write a postcard. So it seems like one thing you're also emphasizing is make it part of your day.
Right. We're working with teachers really closely right now, thinking about how they incorporate writing into these theme-based instructional units that they're doing, and it depends on what the unit is, what that is. But it may be in dramatic play where they've got a veterinarian's office, and what are all the different ways a veterinarian or a person coming into a veterinarian's office might encounter print and reading and encounter writing. And just inviting kids to be part of that. In the Block Center, I've had kids and teachers drawing out diagrams for the zoo that they're going to build, and then labeling it for the different animals they're going to be in this box, and then actually doing it with blocks, or vice versa, creating signs, all the different things that you're doing in your classroom. Writing many times would have a natural part of that if we just included it, instead of, for example, inventing a separate writing activity. I think, I think we need to be thinking about where does writing fit in all the things we're doing in our curriculum.
I love it. I know talking with you has really changed how I interact with my child. And one of the other things I've been amazed with is how early it develops. And that's one of those things that I think gesture really plays an important role, because part of what you're talking about is at this early stage of writing, directing their attention to that meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So as soon as kiddos really early kids will handle a marker or a writing instrument just like they do a rattle or anything else. They're likely to, stick it on their face or put it in their mouth, bang it on the table. But, so how do kids get past that? It's all this interaction they have with where their parent is trying to say, hey, look, this is leaving a mark. And early, really small infants just ignore that. But it's not long at all. By the time kids are, about a year old, they start to be paying attention to that. And it's all these interactions that families have, teachers have if they're working with children that young, around the page, really just sort of messing around, exploring what the markers can do, asking kids, oh, tell me about that, or demonstrate, oh, let's write this for this purpose that kids know. And we just keep doing it. I mean, kids won't get all of that. It's a developmental process. And the writing, the understanding of it is a developmental process. So.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks very much for the invitation. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This is Dr. Debbie Rowe, and you can find her article, Pointing with a Pen, on the Reading Research Quarterly website.